The first thing I remember about that evening was the glow of the chandeliers, soft, golden, almost dreamlike. The hotel restaurant felt like another world, distant from the monotony of daily life. I sat across from my husband, Daniel, smiling when I was supposed to, laughing when it felt right, though inside, I felt an odd stillness. 8 years of marriage had taught me how to perform happiness convincingly. Daniel was talking about work, his tone even, his gestures precise. He was proud of his promotion, and I wanted to be proud for him. Yet somewhere between his words, I realized I couldn't recall the last time we had looked at each other and truly seen one another. The warmth between us had faded into a polite familiarity, like a once bright photograph left too long in the sun. And then, quite unexpectedly, my gaze drifted across the room. He sat alone near the far wall, a man with skin so dark it caught the amber light like polished mahogany. His posture was relaxed, but his presence commanded the space around him. He wasn't beautiful in the conventional sense. He was magnetic, quietly arresting. When his eyes met mine, something wordless passed between us, an invisible current that made me inhale sharply. For a heartbeat, I forgot where I was. The clinking of glasses, the murmur of other diners, even Daniel's voice, all of it faded into the background. I broke eye contact almost immediately, ashamed of the rush of heat that followed. It was absurd, really. I was a married woman, sitting in a public place, and yet a single glance from a stranger had awakened something long dormant inside me. Daniel didn't notice. He was checking his watch, probably calculating the time left before dessert. I forced a smile, nodding at his words, though I hadn't heard them. My heart, traitorous as it was, beat faster, for reasons I couldn't explain. When Daniel excused himself to take a call, I allowed myself one more look. The man was still there, still watching, though not in a way that felt invasive. There was curiosity in his eyes, maybe even recognition, as if he sensed the unspoken loneliness that I carried beneath my calm exterior. Then he smiled, a small knowing curve of the lips that sent another ripple through me. I looked away quickly, embarrassed by how easily I responded to it. When Daniel returned, I composed myself, pretending nothing had changed. But something had, something subtle, almost imperceptible, but real. As we finished dinner and rose to leave, I told myself it was nothing, just a moment passing between two strangers in a crowded room. Yet even as I walked out into the night, I could still feel the weight of that look, like a whisper echoing somewhere deep inside me, waiting to be heard again. The following morning, the city looked different, too bright, too awake, as if mocking the quiet unrest I carried within me. Daniel had already left for work, leaving behind his half-finished cup of coffee and the faint scent of his aftershave. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chair across from me, remembering the stranger's gaze from the night before. It should have faded by now. It was just a glance, a trivial spark, but it hadn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face framed by the warm hotel lights, his expression calm, yet searching, as though he had looked straight through me. I scolded myself for thinking about him at all. It was meaningless, I told myself. A flicker of attention, nothing more. Still, a part of me couldn't help wondering who he was, what his voice might sound like, what kind of life he lived beyond that fleeting moment. The rest of the week passed in the same rhythm. Work, chores, silence. Daniel was busier than ever, spending long evenings at the office, his mind tethered to deadlines and numbers. We spoke, but the words between us felt mechanical, practical exchanges without warmth. I wanted to reach him, to say something that might bridge the quiet gap growing wider each day, but every attempt faltered before it began. On Friday evening, we went to dinner with some of Daniel's colleagues. I smiled when expected, laughed when appropriate, yet felt invisible in the middle of every conversation. When one of the women complimented my dress, Daniel simply nodded, distracted. For reasons I couldn't name, the moment stung more than it should have. That night, lying beside him in the dark, I listened to his steady breathing. I wondered when our love had become something that required effort, something to be maintained rather than lived. My thoughts returned, uninvited, to the stranger from the restaurant. I tried to summon guilt, but what I felt instead was confusion. Not desire, not yet, just the painful awareness of what I'd been missing. By Sunday, I had convinced myself to let it go, to file that night away as nothing more than an odd passing memory. But fate has a way of testing conviction. As I stood in line at a cafe that afternoon, phone in hand, I heard a familiar voice order coffee behind me. Deep, steady, unmistakable. I turned, and there he was. His presence as disarming as before. Our eyes met again, and for a moment, time folded in on itself. Recognition flickered between us, silent and mutual. He smiled politely. "From the hotel," he said. I nodded, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yes." From the hotel. And just like that, the boundary I had so carefully drawn began to blur. He told me his name was Adrian. The way he said it carried an effortless calm, as though he had no need to impress. We stood there in the cafe line, both pretending it was coincidence, though a quiet awareness lingered between us. Our conversation began simply. Small talk about the weather, about how crowded the city felt on weekends. But beneath the ordinary words, something subtle pulsed. His voice was deep and composed, his manner warm but restrained. He looked at me as if I were the only person in the room, and for a fleeting moment, I felt seen again, truly seen. We parted with a polite goodbye, yet my thoughts followed him long after I left. I told myself it was harmless, just conversation. But by evening, when Daniel mentioned plans for another business trip, the guilt surfaced. My mind drifted back to Adrian's steady gaze, and I hated that the comparison even existed. 2 days later, he appeared again, this time outside the same cafe, as if fate had grown fond of teasing me. He smiled and offered to walk me to my car. I hesitated but didn't refuse. The conversation flowed easily, too easily, as though we had known each other for years. I found myself laughing in a way I hadn't in months. Without calculation or restraint, Adrian spoke about his work as a photographer, his travels, the quiet joy of capturing unnoticed moments. People reveal themselves when they think no one's looking, he said. His words struck deeper than he realized. When we reached my car, there was a brief silence. I should have left then, ended whatever strange connection had begun forming between us. But instead, I lingered. "It was nice running into you again," I said softly. "Maybe it doesn't have to be coincidence next time," he replied. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every rational thought told me to forget him, but curiosity clawed at the edges of my resolve. It wasn't desire that consumed me. It was the ache of something unfulfilled, a longing I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. A week later, I met him again, deliberately this time. We shared coffee, laughter, stories that felt too personal for two near strangers. And yet, I told him things I had never told Daniel. Fears, dreams, fragments of myself that had been gathering dust. When I returned home, Daniel greeted me with a distracted smile, his laptop still open. I watched him for a long moment, realizing that he hadn't noticed anything different in me, hadn't sensed that something was slowly, quietly shifting. As I stood there in the dim kitchen light, one truth settled heavily in my chest. I was crossing a line, inch by inch, and even though nothing irreversible had happened yet, the distance between thinking about it and doing it had never felt so small. Rain began to fall the next time I saw him. The city shimmered under a curtain of silver, the kind of day that blurred reflections in every window. Adrian had called earlier, his voice calm but persuasive. "I want to show you something," he said. Against my better judgment, I agreed. His studio was tucked inside an old brick building that smelled faintly of paint and rainwater. The walls were lined with photographs, portraits of strangers, streets caught mid-motion, faces half turned toward light. It was beautiful and haunting. A world built entirely from moments people never realized were being captured. "This one," he said, gesturing toward a photograph near the center, "reminds me of you." The image showed a woman sitting by a fogged cafe window, her reflection fractured by raindrops. Her expression was unreadable, somewhere between longing and regret. "She looks lonely," I said. "She looks honest," he corrected gently. Something in his tone disarmed me. I turned toward him, wanting to speak but unable to find the right words. The air between us was quiet but heavy, charged with meaning neither of us dared to name. "You seem lost," he murmured, his gaze steady. "Like you're standing still while the world keeps moving." I swallowed hard. Maybe I am. For a long moment, we stood there. No words, no movement. Just two people suspended in a silence that said too much. My heart raced, torn between the comfort of being seen and the shame of what that connection meant. Then he stepped back, breaking the spell. "You should go," he said softly, "before this turns into something we can't undo." His restraint startled me. It should have made it easier to walk away, but instead it made me ache even more. Because for the first time, someone else had voiced the very fear I'd been carrying. When I returned home, Daniel was already there, sitting on the couch with the TV flickering soundlessly. He looked up and smiled, unaware of the storm unraveling inside me. I wanted to tell him everything, to confess the confusion, the guilt, the strange solace I had found in another man's words. But when I opened my mouth, no sound came out. Instead, I sat beside him and pretended to watch the news. The rain outside drummed softly against the windows, the same rhythm that had followed me from Adrian's studio. And though Daniel's hand rested lightly on mine, it felt like there were miles of silence between us, silence I had helped create. That night, lying awake beside him, I realized something painful, yet undeniable. I had reached the edge of a choice that would define everything that came after. The truth never arrives loudly. It slips in quietly, like light through a half-open door. Mine came one evening when Daniel found my phone face up on the table. A message from Adrian glowed on the screen. Simple, harmless on the surface. "Thank you for coming by today." But Daniel's eyes told me he understood everything those words didn't say. He didn't shout. He didn't accuse. He just looked at me, as though searching for the woman he used to know. "Is there something you want to tell me?" he asked. My throat tightened. I wanted to say no, to minimize it, but lying felt crueler than the truth. "It's not what you think," I whispered, even though it was exactly that. What he thought, what I feared. His expression didn't change. "Then what is it?" I had no answer, only tears that refused to fall. He stood slowly, the weight of silence between us unbearable. "I can forgive many things," he said finally, "but not the part of you that chose someone else, even for a moment." Then he walked out, leaving behind the scent of rain-soaked air and the echo of a door closing on something I'd taken for granted. The days that followed blurred together. Grey mornings, restless nights, an empty side of the bed that mocked me with its stillness. Adrian texted once more, asking if I was all right. I stared at the message until the letters blurred, then deleted it without replying. There was no comfort left in his words, only consequence. I began walking every evening, tracing the same streets Daniel and I once strolled together. The city felt unfamiliar now, as though it had shifted subtly, while I wasn't paying attention. Maybe it had, or maybe I had. Weeks passed before Daniel returned home. He didn't bring anger with him, only distance. We spoke carefully, like strangers afraid of stepping on the wrong memory. There were no accusations, no dramatic ultimatums, just a quiet understanding that forgiveness, if it came, would take time. One night, I found myself back at the same hotel restaurant, alone, the same dim light, the same piano melody weaving through the air. I ordered a glass of wine and watched reflections shimmer on the table's surface. For a moment, I thought about Adrian, about what might have been and what should never have been. Then I thought of Daniel, of the love I had treated like background noise until it went silent. The past couldn't be rewritten, but perhaps it could be understood. I raised my glass, not in celebration, but in acknowledgement of what the night had taught me. Sometimes the hardest truth is that being seen by someone else means nothing if you can't face yourself first. And as I walked out into the cool night air, I carried that truth with me, quiet, heavy, and entirely my own.